So what do you do if you're depressed, you're neurotic, you're anxious, you're dealing with a sensitivity towards stress? I mean, that's bad enough, in of itself, but equally it comes with this secret burden that you know about, that perhaps other people will never know about, that can never know about, an extra obstacle, an extra problem that you just have to deal with in secret, on top of all the shit that is that kind of, poor mental health, that sort of proclivity towards mental anguish and stress and negative thinking and all that kind of stuff. Here's what I think depression is, and I'm just going to talk from my own experience. And for me, it's basically you have a trigger event. Something bad happens in your life, and it could be maybe one major thing. It could be like a series of smaller things. For me, normally it's 3 strikes and I'm out. I can take one little bad thing happening, some bad little comment. I'm walking down the street and someone sort of swears at me, some drunk guy who's just off his head, he's on drugs or something. It's like, okay, that's just frustrating. It's annoying for someone to insult me, but it's like they're drunk, you can pass it off. But then something else bad happens. You go to the shop because you really need to pick up some milk for something. Let's just say you need to bake a birthday cake for someone, and the one ingredient you're missing is milk. I don't know, eggs or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's just some ingredient that you need, and it's sold out. It's sold out of the shops, and it's like, oh, this is not good. And anyway, you have a series of these smaller events, and sometimes that there'll be one straw, one event that just breaks the camel's back, that just causes you to just go into a depression. And perhaps there's underlying negative mental health issues that make you more predisposed to the smaller things kind of mounting up and then it resulting in this big explosion at the end. And then you're gonna get depressed. And the trouble with depression is, it's bad enough when bad things happen, bad events or whatever, bad situations. And certainly, there are different types of depression. With me, it's an escalation of negativity. This is how I deal with depression. So my mind tends to think about a bad thing. Let's just say that I've been fired. My partner wants to break up with me. My kids don't want to see me anymore. After some conflict, my family members die. Those are some big events, I think, worthy of anyone feeling depressed. But then there'll be this kind of spiral of introspection, negative introspection, where I'll basically go into my mind and kind of relate this kind of negative feeling to other negative feelings. I guess might be a better word to say it's kind of like an interconnected web of negative stimulus or memories or thoughts that are sort of inside my mind. It's the filing cabinet of negativity. And once it gets opened, once there's some catastrophic event, or like I say, it could be a series of smaller events, the filing cabinet opens. And it's not just looking at the file that says, oh, you've been dumped or you've been sacked or whatever it is. All the files open. All the times that you felt bad about yourself, about life, about the world, all those files are now open, and your brain is trying to sort through them again. It's almost like the filing cabinet has been tipped upside down, everything's been shaken out, and you're just left with this flaw, this flood of negative thoughts, memories, feelings, and you're surrounded by them. You can't move because of them. And so the only way to deal with that is to start filing it back in. But obviously every time you pick up that file with that negative thought or memory and you put it back in the filing cabinet, you're bearing witness to it. And you experience it, you've brought it to the surface, and it's going to basically take time. For me, when I get like that, it takes time for my brain to sort of mentally store things away, to process, the negative, all the negative stuff that's going on. It's just a weird. It's like a chain reaction or a cascade of events. You have the one major thing happen, and then it's sort of branches off into all these other negative things, and that is what causes the depression. That is what causes you to want to shut down, to be insanely stressed or worried, or be like just sobbing for days, not being able to move, not want to do anything, not be able to do anything. It's and And you know, these kind of depressions, they can last a day, 2 days, weeks, months. It depends how much shit your brain has to sort through, but you do need the time to sort through it. The trouble is when you're sorting through it, that whole process is, well, it's painful as fuck, because you are dealing with just really painful thoughts and memories and feelings. And I always think it's funny, there was this study where brain scientists were using some kind of brain imaging technology, MRIs or something like that, to find the part of the brain that highlights, that, you know, lights up, they say, you know, that is active, that corresponds with pain, you know, physical pain. And you know, they found the part of the brain that does that typically, and then they would show people that were, you know, that experiencing physical pain, you know, maybe they would, you know, pinch someone's toe or something, you know, that brain area would light up. And then they'd show someone something mentally distressing, you know, like pictures of child abuse or something, or just ask them to think of negative memories in their own lives. And again, the same part of the brain lit up. And anyway, this little experiment basically showed that whether it be physical pain or mental pain, it's all kicking off in the same part of the brain. And you could derive from that pain, mental or physical, is definitely happening in your brain. And feelings, thoughts, whether it is physical or mental, it's all just basically electrochemical signals that are firing off in your brain, and that's causing you to feel a certain way. And I think it's fair to say that mental pain can be just as real to you, the sufferer, as physical pain. But this is something which I think, you know, you could make a good scientific argument is true, but because a feeling of pain or a feeling of suffering, whatever, that's so subjective, and no one else can measure it other than you, because it's just happening to you alone in your mind. You know, no one else will have the experience. You know, they can see the area of the brain that lights up potentially. You know, if you're far in the future, you'll have these sort of medical doctor scientists that are checking to see just how ill someone is, just how much someone is suffering, and then they can say, "Oh yeah, I can see the patterns in your brain," but they don't know what it's like. You know, philosophers would call this qualia, or this sort of subjective experience, this feeling of that thing happening to you. It only happens to the individual. You can't measure it outside of the experience and the feelings itself. But you'll experience it, and you'll have to deal with it. And yeah, so I just brought that up because it's an interesting little marker just to prove how painful depression is, or that kind of depression. You know, when you're just in the depths of despair. You know, like I say, my analogy with the filing cabinets, the files are flooded around you. It's just bad thoughts, bad memories. There's nowhere you can look where you can't see just negative thoughts and memories and feelings and all this kind of stuff. But being depressed as well, like this proclivity towards the negative, you know, I can imagine there's some kind of evolutionary benefit to being like that. I've talked about this before. You have a bad thing about to happen. You think about bad things a lot in general. You know, it makes you more tentative, more cautious. You know, the next person who isn't like that is going to be the person that basically takes too bigger of a risk and they end up dying. You know, this cautiousness, this negativity bias, I think kind of, you know, can actually protect us and is actually, you know, a valuable tool. And one of the reasons potentially why human beings have survived and, you know, as long as we have, and, you know, are as dominant as we are as a species. Which is fine in a group. You know, it's fine to have someone in a group who's, you know, super neurotic, who's going to maybe preemptively sound alarms, going to at least spark a bit of fear of doubt into everyone else in the group, in the tribe, in the community, within the society. You know, it's good to have people like that around you to try and keep you grounded and stuff. To be the person who is, you know, negatively inclined, that's not such a good thing for you as an individual, because you have this subjective negative experience, and it's it's something that just the majority of people just will not understand. Now I'm talking about depression specifically, kind of the way that I conceptualize it and think about it with me personally. There's several different types of depression. There's some people that are just in a bad situation. If they get out of that situation, they'll be fine. There's some people who are lonely. If they just meet with other people and they develop some friendships or relationships, they'll be fine. There's people that have childhood traumas, post-traumatic stress. Once they get over that, if they can, then they'll be fine. But there are people, I think, who are just genetically wired to think a certain way, to suffer from depression due to a sort of personality trait that they were born with. That is to say, this big 5 personality trait, neuroticism. If you're born with that, you're just predisposed to thinking negatively. And I think you're going to be far more susceptible to sort of depression and overwhelmed than the next person. I'm not a depression scientist. It's not my day job to know about this, but I do know subjectively what it's like to deal with depression and to have gone into the depths of depression and to come out the other side. It's something I've done countless times, dozens of times over the course of my life to varying degrees. Times when for 6 months, I would just be in bed, not wanting to get out, not wanting to do anything. I could just about manage getting some basic things to eat, going to the toilet. Maybe once every month I could just care for myself in other ways. And I was reliant on other people to look after me. I was in a bad way. Like I say, the mental pain I was experiencing would be, on a par with someone with chronic physical pain, someone that has like a bad back or, just constant migraines or something. It's like, you're dealing with just a debilitating illness at that point. So I know what it's like to feel like that, and I know what it's also like to maybe have a shorter run of it. Even recently, I had an issue where there was an argument about the future with someone, and it made me question my own future. Then I started thinking about all the negative things that could potentially happen in my future or that will no longer happen. I thought about my life, the blueprint I had for it, and how I can't align my goals with that blueprint anymore, that kind of stuff. And then I ended up getting depressed, and I was laying in bed for 2 days, not really wanting to get out and do anything. And part of that was, I think, that kind of burying your head in the sand, or like burying your head in the pillows and the covers, bed sheets. It just sounds very dramatic, like people might do it, you'd think they'd want attention or stuff. And I'm sure there are people that just want to show the world how bad they are, by, hiding under the covers and not wanting to come out and all that kind of stuff. But the opposite is true for me. I just don't want to burden anyone else with my shit. I don't want to cause an issue. I don't want to have interactions with people and they then talk to me and I'm just, exploding with, negative thoughts, negative talk, just negative outlooks. So I don't want to bring anyone down. I don't want to bring anyone down to my level. So I think hiding away for me is like something I do both to give myself time to sort of recalibrate, reassess, clear up my mind, put the negative files back in the filing cabinet. And it also helps give other people a break from me, so I do it for their sake as well. But this is just one of the issues when you're dealing with mental health problems and depression and stuff. But being someone like me, highly neurotic, sensitive to stress, the trouble is on a day-to-day basis as well, you've got this general instinct or tendency or proclivity, pick your word of choice there, to want to, and it's not even a want, it's like you can't help it. It feels like a want, I suppose, or a need, but yeah, either way, you can't help it. You're drawn to negative things, you can't help but think about a situation, a thing, anything in a negative way. Like I say, there's good things about that. Is, if you were like a product tester and your job was to evaluate the merits of a new invention, a new product, and you were being paid for your critical insights and analysis, You know, you could potentially make a lot of money as someone doing that, because you would just say it how it is. You'd say, you know, X doesn't work, Y doesn't work, this is useless because of this reason. As long as you had reasons and you weren't just saying that I hate it, the end. Again, you know, advantages to negative thinking. Being able to criticise and see what's bad is how you solve problems. You know, if you think everything's good, then you can't really solve any problem, because, you know, how do you navigate that without knowing where you want to move away from? You know, it's all good and well knowing where you want to get to, but you still need to know where you want to get away from. But yeah, on a day-to-day level, it's dealing with this negative outlook. I'll give some examples. You know, let's say I'll meet a friend and we'll have a talk. You know, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm okay. How are you? Not so good, but, you know. And then after a while, you start to realise some of their faults, some of their flaws, the times when they're not really listening to you and you'll clock onto it, the times where they say stuff and they talk a little bit too much, you know, and they don't really, you know, it gets a bit self-indulgent. They don't really care about your time, how interested you are. They're just venting and talking about something that they want to, you know, talk about. You know, you'll notice perhaps you feel like when you talk, they don't really listen properly. They don't really care. You know, maybe they've got these weird habits. You know, they have these weird snorting and it just makes you feel a bit sick. Or, you know, they do this weird thing where they spit on the floor or something. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of examples here that would make sense. But there'll be something about people that you just don't like. And being someone who is sort of highly neurotic, someone who's prone to this sort of negative thinking, you'll pick up on all these things. Now, all these things will be true things. You know, they will be annoying little habits. They will be, you know, they will be objectively bad. You know, if you have a friend that has a habit of spitting on the floor when you're walking down the street with them, you know, that's gross. That's not a good habit. You know, I get it. Sometimes you've got mucus and snot and you want to spit it out. You know, if you've got some kind of condition, some kind of asthma or something where you get mucus on the lungs, you need to spit it out. You got to do what you got to do. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the people that it's just a bad habit. It's just a bad habit. Maybe they got into it. Maybe some guy tried to look tough, so he started spitting on the floor because it made him feel like he was tough. Or, you know, some guy saw some football player doing it and they thought, oh, that football player spits all the time, I'm going to do that. And it's like, yeah, it's just gross, don't do it. Now, these are sort of negative things, but for the neurotic, for the negatively inclined, it's going to affect you a lot more than the next person to see stuff like this. And that is when you have to deal with the secret burden. Because if you constantly pull someone up on everything they do, it's like, look, okay, they did a spit on the floor. You know, it's gross. You can tell your friend or that you're someone you've met out with, look, that's gross, don't do that. And then they might do it again, and you might keep saying, just don't do that, don't do that. If you become someone who eventually just nags someone all the time for the things that they do that you don't agree with, you know, if you're a perfectionist and your standards are so high and you want other people to meet those standards, you know, you're going to annoy people, you're going to irritate people. People aren't going to want to be around you. You're not going to be the fun person to be with, and you're just going to end up not having friends, relationships, and then, you know, the depression then exacerbates because it's, oh, now you're lonely again, you don't have anyone in your corner, etc. Maybe spitting is the wrong example. It could just be something, you know, maybe someone just talks a bit slowly and you get a bit impatient with them, or maybe they talk too fast and you feel inferior or stupid around them. Or I don't know, whatever it is, you know. Just you can't pull people up on this. You can't keep saying, let's stop doing this. This is annoying. That's annoying. Or even when you're around people, you can't say, I don't like X. I don't like Y. This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. Because most people don't want to hear it. They don't want to just hear someone constantly moaning. Effectively, I was actually out with a group of people when they were talking about. One of the people in this group of 5 of us was saying about someone they worked with. He said, oh, I work with this guy and he's always moaning, constantly moaning. Every time I see him, he's always moaning at something, complaining about something, you know, and he was, you know, this guy, that I'd met up with, you know, amongst the 5 of us, you know, he was complaining, but he was complaining about the moaner, the criticizer, the one who's constantly doing it. And I just thought, I don't ever want to be that. I don't ever want to be the person who, behind closed doors at some dinner amongst friends, I'm the topic of discussion, but not in a good way. You know, I don't want anyone to say, you know, that guy, he's always complaining, he's always moaning. I don't want to be that guy. But then in order to not be that guy, you have to be inauthentic to yourself. You can't, you know, you might have this natural tendency to want to criticise, to want to think negatively, to want to communicate in a sort of on a negative level, to point out all these true things that you see are negative, but other people don't like it. And so you have to live with that sort of, it's like a hidden burden on top of all the depression and stuff, you know, as well. I don't think there's a solution for it. All I'm saying is if you ever feel like that, if you're someone who does think negatively a lot about a lot of things and feels as though you can't fully express it for fear of being ostracised or criticised, or, you know, it will have some greater negative impact on your life, all I'm saying is I can relate to that. I understand what that's like, and not everyone will, you know, not most people don't have this negative thinking proclivity. Like I say, it's not that we want to think in a negative way. We don't choose this, you know, but for whatever reason, that's the card we've been dealt. We have the tendency to just be drawn to all the shit in life that's going wrong, that's not working, that's stressing us out. We probably just want to solve it, but because there's just so much of it, it just overwhelms us. But it's difficult, you know. Friends, therapists, family members, you know, people that you come into contact, people who might feel as though they're good people. And I'm sure some of them are and have good intentions. People will pay lip service to this idea that that they're a good listener, that they will open up, that they would want their friends to open up around them and to be honest and to allow their friends to express themselves freely and that kind of stuff. But in practice, they wouldn't want to hear it. Honestly, if the people in my life knew just how much negative shit I thought about myself, about them, and about society at large, they wouldn't ever want to know me. I would never have any friends. I'd never be in a relationship. I'd never be able to hold down a job and have, you know, peers that I speak to at work who don't actively hate me, or a boss that doesn't want to fire me. All this shit I have to keep to myself. And some of it I think fair enough, you know. Just because you think a negative thing about someone doesn't mean you should say it. Because we all think negative things at time, even if you're not naturally neurotic and negatively inclined. So yeah, it's just a good thing, I think, to be mindful, to be tactful, to hold back, to show restraint. I think that's a good thing, and it shows kindness, consideration, self-discipline, responsibility for your actions, integrity. It's good. It's just difficult when you're naturally thinking a load of negative shit. And I think the things that people would really care about is when you're thinking negatively about them. You know, you hang around with a friend a lot, and like I say, you just notice these little things that they do that are just really annoying. You notice that actually they're not a very good communicator. Actually, they don't listen a lot. Actually, you know, they're not very moral in certain ways. You know, maybe they do a lot of bad things. You know, maybe they're messing their life up, and you can see how and why. And you know, maybe they've said something, you know, somewhat negative about you, and you feel like you want to defend yourself and reel off all the things about them. But that's not how you build connections in life. You got to hold back. Like the sort of secret burden of holding back. Like I say, to some degree, everyone does it. Everyone has to do it. You know, in order to get by, you can't just constantly say what you think, unless you happen to be just a really happy, positive person who always sees the best in people. You know, that's good for you. You've been dealt with good hands where you don't even have to betray yourself in keeping your thoughts to yourself. You know, if someone does something that you don't agree with, it's like you don't spend much time thinking about it. You just move on and concentrate on the positive aspects of that person. And, you know, because that's the thing with people, there's good and there's bad and there's stuff in between. And it's all true. Well, let's just say for argument's sake, it can all be true. People can be selfish, ignorant cunts at times, and they can equally be, you know, giving, caring, kind, friendly human beings at other times. And the trouble is just when you have this kind of this like a radar signal. It's like a homing signal. It homes in on just the negative aspects. You're aware of the good aspects. You're aware that they're not, you know, there's some people you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. They're not irredeemable. They're not evil. You know, they're just regular flawed human beings like everyone else. But you notice a hell of a lot of flaws, you know, many of which they probably don't even know themselves. And you're very, very conscious of it, very cognizant of it, and you just can't do anything about it. You can't mention it. You can't say about it because it's just gonna offend most people. Most people don't have the strength to take criticism. Like you've got to have so much confidence in yourself and sort of internal security and sort of awareness of yourself, you know, to be able to take criticism, unless you're just a bit stupid and ignorant and you just have a deluded sense of self. Most people they don't want to hear it. But, you know, what do you do? What do you do when you're just, you know, you go on a trip? Let's just say, you know, you meet a partner. I'd go out on a holiday, a vacation with my girlfriend, and I'd be worrying about everything. I'd be worrying about, you know, getting to the airport, the plane leaving on time, there potentially being people looking at me, scrutinising me, judging me negatively. You know, I'll be taking everyone's little, you know, micro signals when they look at me, you know, in a negative way. And it's not necessarily that there's, you know, random strangers at an airport would be negatively criticising me. But it's almost like you would see this sort of unconscious negative bias, you know, like, I mean, my feeling is with people that generally, when it comes to strangers, the vast majority of people don't like other people. And you get a few weird exceptions, maybe like 10 to 20% of people are just naturally happy, love being around all people, naturally think the best of everyone, that kind of thing. But they're definitely in the minority. Most people, like, I don't even think they're indifferent. I think they just naturally, you know, have a bad feeling towards it. Just imagine walking down a dark street at night. You know, me being a man, if I'm walking behind a woman down a dark street at night, is she naturally going to think, there's this guy, you know, walking directly behind me in a dark street? I should turn round and, you know, smile and strike up a conversation. Or is she going to start walking a little bit faster, thinking, who the fuck is this creep? You know, I'm obviously not a creep. I don't care. I'm just happen to be walking down the street at the same time this woman is. But, you know, there'd just be this natural instinct to just feel as though everyone could potentially be a threat, that everyone could naturally have bad intentions. And I think it's just one of those evolutionary things that's kept people safe, men or women. And, you know, it has its advantages, but it does mean that a lot of people have this kind of cautious negativity, this skepticism, this fear of everyone else. And that in and of itself could just be a statement of fact, but if you're highly neurotic and you're quite aware and you're quite switched on, I think you can be quite empathetic towards that fear, that skepticism, and it can then be quite easy to take that personally and to feel it yourself. I mean, all this stuff I'm saying, it could completely just be a me problem. There could be no one else who gets this. I mean, so far as I'm concerned, in my life, anyone who I've actually tried to explain this kind of stuff to, most people don't get it. They just don't get it. And even people that I know that have depression, you know, most people that I know that have experienced depression, it was due to a short-term situational thing, you know, due to like a loss of partner, loss of job, or a bereavement, you know, those kind of big life events where everything's fucked up, everything's that you thought you knew is now not as you know, everything, you know, there's just chaos and disorder, and it takes time to like recalibrate. Most people don't know what it's like to have a chronic depression, to just literally exist in life on a suboptimal level, on a, you know, in a kind of generally sort of bad mood at best. And like I say, this isn't a choice, and I don't even know. I feel as though this isn't even something that you can kind of train yourself out of. The only people that have ever said to me, oh, you know, I used to feel negative and then I found a way to like get over it and now I don't feel like that anymore. It's like, well, whatever it was that you had, it wasn't what I had. You know, I feel as though whatever you had might have been a situational thing. You had a shit upbringing and it caused you as a child to develop all these weird, like, feelings, social stigmas. You know, had all this basically post-traumatic stress that you kind of inherited as a child. You weren't genetically or naturally drawn to being someone who is, you know, a negative thinker or depressed. But for me, I mean, I'm always open to the option that, yeah, it can all, you can change it. You can change all of this stuff. But for me personally, what I mean, I'm coming up towards my mid-40s, and in the decades that I've actively been searching for answers, let's just say the last 30 years of trying to understand myself and why I have these, why I think negatively, why I'm neurotic, you know, why I have chronic depression. For me personally, I've just come to the conclusion that it's just baseline genetics, or it's like just the code that I was made with, you know, the genetic code. It was maybe there's a way to intervene, but I don't know. I mean, if there's a way to stop me from having things like the negative thinking that I have, it would literally be you'd have to perform a lobotomy on me, or maybe not a lobotomy, but you'd have to maybe plug in some like electrodes into my brain to stop certain parts of my brain from firing the way they fire. I don't think there's any kind of software update that can help this situation. I think a hardware update is the only thing required. I might be wrong though, because there's so much overlap between, you know, when you're dealing with depression, between the sort of the hardware, the brain activity, you know, the chemical reactions, and the, you know, what's going on with you know, serotonin or dopamine, or, you know, neural pathways and receptors in your brain. Like, there's all of that stuff going on, but then there's the faults, you know, and you can think yourself into feeling terrified or think yourself into being happy. You know, there's things like called placebos, which basically allow your brain to change your physiology just by thinking about it. So there might be interventions for some people that are completely sort of software based, that are, you know, therapeutic practices, and I think for others maybe a hardware solution is the only way forward. But I don't know. And there isn't much in way of hardware. The old days of strapping, you know, mental patients to, you know, effectively electric chairs, or putting, you know, electrical, you know, shocks through people's heads and into their brains, you know, that for the most part is over. Although I have heard more recently research being done whereby was it transcranial electrostimulation basically electrical impulses being sent to certain parts of the brain are being sort of, this idea has been revisited and does have promising results. But for the layman, for the regular person, we're decades away from that sort of therapy ever being anything towards mainstream. That, as always, I honestly feel like this generation and generations before just have to part with it. They have to part with this sort of silent suffering that is depression. It's pain that no one can see. It's suffering that no one but you knows about. It's a quality of life that's massively hampered by, negative thinking and anxiety and yeah, just pain, just living a painful, suffering life. And in the future, I don't know, maybe they'll get, as a matter of course, the go-to treatments will be, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, basically, or LSD, or DMT, or some kind of psychoactive chemical, basically, that it's just considered like recreational or illegal now. Something like that's probably going to be like, okay, we've actually found the solution, and people don't have to be depressed. People don't have to have this negative outlook. People don't have to be the way they are, and that might be all people need. Equally, some kind of electrical brain stimulation might be just par for the course. It's like, hey doc, I feel a bit sad today because of X, Y, and Z. Can you snap me out of it? Yeah, of course. Okay, maybe not as blasé as that, but certainly if you're 15, 16 years old and you get to a point where it's like, doc, I've spent my whole life being depressed, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. My family life, my upbringing seems pretty good. I only have the typical everyday struggles that everyone has, but for some reason I feel worse than the next person. Perhaps then, that kind of stuff might, the electrical brain therapy might be an answer. But for now, it's kind of just dealing with it, finding ways to cope. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to just talk about these thoughts about, like I say, just what it's like to deal with depression, and to have as well this sort of the secret burden of just the negative thoughts that can never be actualized. You can never be told. You can never be fully yourself. You can never be your authentic negative self, because it's just incompatible with society. And I'm just acknowledging that, just saying that, we're not alone in this. If this is something that you have felt or do feel, who knows. So anyway, thanks for listening to my discussion on depression. If you've got any thoughts about that, let me know, and hopefully I'll see you again in a future video.